Hello, dear friends. Bishop Stephen here. Very pleased to be with you and enjoying standing in for Bishop Dagmar this week for Trinity 8 as we reflect on our readings for Sunday morning, the related readings. In Isaiah 55, we hear God's great invitation into abundant life, to be, in our terms in the diocese, to be fully alive in Him, and not to be surprised by the extraordinary ways in which God will bring about His salvation and many nations coming to join in the promise of Israel. And as we celebrate that abundance of life, so we reflect too upon our reading from Matthew about the feeding of the 5,000. When Jesus goes to sit down in a deserted place, withdrawing as He often did to pray to His Father, He has compassion on the crowd that follows Him. And He, of course, taking the loaves and the fish, in spite of the incredulity and of the disciples, He performs this miracle, feeding not only 5,000 men, but many women and children too, that the whole of humanity gathered around Him is to be fed. When we reflect on this miracle and its context, we need to remember that if we just see our life in mechanistic terms and don't see our lives in the whole, then we miss out on the miracle that the whole of our life is. And the greatest miracle of all is that God sent His only Son to be our Saviour and to be the one who would feed us always. So when He takes the bread, it's rather liturgical. He takes the bread and prays over it and blesses it and breaks it as it is then handed out in the many fragments to feed His people. It's reminiscent of course, and meant to be reminiscent of the feeding of the people of Israel in the wilderness, in the desert, with the food provided by God through the imploring of Moses. But here it's not Moses, it's somebody greater than Moses, because God is in the midst of us, in the midst of those people, that crowd, feeding them with heavenly food. It's reminiscent, of course, also, and meant to be, of the Eucharist, of the Last Supper, where Jesus Himself will become the broken bread, the one who goes to the cross for our salvation. And, of course, the same God, the same Jesus, takes each one of us and blesses us, and may call us to be broken, but gives us out to be His bread in the world, to be signs of His love. When Paul in Romans 5 talks about his own people, the Jews, he talks with such fervour and passion, desirous that they should come to know the fullness of life and the love of the Saviour. And as I said at the beginning, Jesus is the one who had compassion on the crowd. He loves them just for the sake of loving them, with no ulterior motive. Love is His only motive. And for us, as we gather to serve, especially emerging from the pandemic, and thinking about how we best serve and engage with our communities, so we are the ones called to love for the sake of loving, not for the way in which some people might use care as a form of power. Power does not enter into this. This is serving for the sake of love, because Jesus had compassion on all, enough compassion to die on a cross that we might live.